colleague of mine called Julian Tejada. He's also Colombian. He's also in Brazil in the Federal University of Sergipe. He does cognitive neuroscience and experimental psychology. And Freddy Hernandez Barajas, another statistician in Colombia. Also very experienced people and very, very good collaborators. So the idea behind this presentation is about blending two different fields. One is psychometrics, which I'll explain in detail later on, and the framework, statistical learning framework called GAMLSS, GAMLSS, and I'll explain that later on as well. So I'm gonna speak about how these two can be blended. So just to start with a little bit of the content, so we are gonna cover things like what psychometrics, for those of you who are not familiar with the field. I'm gonna mention some of the techniques that are being used for psychometrics. Then I'll speak about GAMS. It's a new framework for statistical learning, and I'll give some details about GAMS, an example of with real data, and some final thoughts. So, what is psychometrics? What's the goal in psychometrics? So, in general terms, psychometrics is the field of study concerned with the theory and technique of psychological measurement. And I put in bold psychological measurement because that's the whole intention, is just to measure psychological processes. Psychometrics requires applying statistical models and methods to analyze and interpret data from tests, questionnaires, and scales. So now we have another keyword here, and it's statistical models. So now we have two keywords that refer to psychometrics: psychological measurement, statistical models. So putting this together, we can say that psychometrics aims to assign quantitative values or scores to psychological attributes through standardized testing procedures and statistical techniques. That's what psychometrics is about. And you see psychometrics being reflected in things like tests, questionnaires, and scales. Those are the main examples of what psychometrics is all about. But psychometrics is precisely about doing this. Okay? So, bottom line is any kind of psychological data that is being taken from these kind of sources, tests, questionnaires, and scales. Now, some of the psychometric methods that exist out there, and I'm basically referring to a book called Handbook of Educational Measurement and Psychometrics using R. It's a book from 2018. It's published by one of my colleagues. This one, Okan Bulut, he's in Canada. He's a psychometrician. And this book is very, very good. It has all the procedures that you need in psychometrics. That's everything is covered in the book. And I'm happy to share the book if you need it. I can provide the PDF because I have it, so I can share it with you all. Okay, some of the approaches. So we have Bayesian approaches. So this one is basically an approach that allows incorporating prior information and updating beliefs based on new data, which can be advantageous for complex psychometric models. So one of the techniques I haven't covered here, and I won't speak about it, is called BAMS, which is a Bayesian additive models for location, scale, and shape. Okay, so that's a technique that was published in 2018. There is an R package for this, and it's a pretty advanced technique mixing GAMS with Bayesian methods. But I'm not going to speak about it in detail. Just want to mention it so people who are interested in Bayesian statistics can have a look at it. I recommend this paper. And if you cannot have access to the paper, let me know and I'll happily share the PDF. A typical approach in psychometrics is called IRT, item response theory, which is a technique that analyzes item level data from tests and questionnaires. They provide a framework for estimating person abilities and item characteristics on a common scale. Advanced IRT models like multidimensional IRT and explanatory IRT are emerging areas of research. Another one is called differential item functioning, also known as DIF, which is basically a technique that allows identifying test items that function differently across different groups, for example, gender, ethnicity, after controlling for ability levels. It helps detect bias and enhance fairness of tests. Another technique is called multi-level or hierarchical modeling. As we know, it basically is a technique that accounts for nested data structures, for example, students within classrooms, and allow modeling variables at multiple levels simultaneously. Then, more recently, there is a big push towards incorporating machine learning approaches and artificial intelligence in every single field. And psychometrics has also been aware of these things. So some of the methods that we find are, for example, the typical cross-validation using psychometric data, just for prediction. As we know, boosting is another technique from machine learning. Look, and at this point, I should mention something. I use the word machine learning because that's the concept that we see on the news that is most commonly used. Personally, I prefer to use the concept of statistical learning. The reason is that I believe that machine learning is just pure statistics, and there is nothing in the field of machine learning that doesn't require statistics as we know it. So that's why I'm not like so impressed with the concept of machine learning, or I don't see it as something mysterious. For me, it's just statistical learning, statistical methods, basically. Another technique that is very popular in statistical learning is also called lasso regression. And we know also the unsupervised and supervised learning algorithms is also being used in psychometrics. Okay, so those are, in general terms, all the techniques that we can, in general terms, that we can consider approach or allow you to do psychometric analysis. Okay, so it's this one. Now let's speak about GAMS as a new framework for statistical learning. And I'll mention towards the very end how GAMS fits within what we know about regression methods. Okay, so for now, mm, I want to explain what GAMS is, but then at the very end, I'll show you the big picture where GAMS sits in relation to other methods that we know, like linear models or generalized linear models. So, what is GAMS? Let's start with a simple formula like this. Let's decompose this formula step by step. So we have the y, which represents a response variable. We have a chosen distribution, which can be continuous, like a gamma distribution, could be discrete, like a Poisson distribution, could be mixed, for example, two exponentials, or could be continuous and bounded, like a beta distribution. Now, these here, these mu, sigma, nu, and tau represent the parameters of the distribution, and they usually represent the location, which is mu, the sigma could be the scale, and nu and tau represent the skewness and kurtosis. So that's when we speak about distributions with four parameters. So let's give an example here. For example, we have a data set, a vector of data that can be model represented by a normal distribution that has two parameters, location and scale. And we have this other terminology here just to say that the mu or the mean can be modeled by these two things that we know are part of any kind of regression model, which is the design metrics for the predictors of each parameter, and these are the vectors of the regression coefficients. So what we are saying here is that with GANs, we can actually model both the effects of covariates in both the mean and standard deviation. So to put it in simple terms, we can say if there is an effect of gender on the mean response variable, but also an effect of gender in relation to the variance in the response variable. That's an advantage of GAMS. So I hope that you start to see from here the difference between a typical linear model and what GAMS allow you to do. So let's go in more detail here. So this one, going back to the GAMS equation and this representation of the data, this one will be the typical traditional linear model where we see the effects of the covariates on the mean response. Okay. Now, with GAMS, you can actually investigate the effects of the covariates on the two parameters that describe your distribution, your dependent variable. We are using, for the sake of explanation, we are using the normal distribution that has two parameters, but we can choose a distribution that has 3 or 4 parameters and check whether the covariates have an effect on each of the parameters. Okay, so that's an important thing to see here. You see now the big leap in analysis that you have from the traditional linear model to a GAMS model. You can see here that the message is very simple. We can see linear effects of the covariates on both the mean of the location and the scale, whereas the traditional linear model is only on the location and always assuming the normal distribution. In GAMS, we can assume the normal distribution, but we can assume any other distribution. And something that is very interesting now, and actually there's a paper that came out late last year. I don't have the paper here, but it's called something like basically the power of mixing P-splines and GAMS, which is the P-splines smoothers. It's like you can actually do non-linear modeling in GAMS. So look at the progress here, you see? Now, we can say we are not only going to model the effects of the covariates on the location and the scale, but we can also check whether a non-linear fitting gives you a better response, a better fit to the data. So now you start to see how flexible it is, you see? That's why GAMS is considered a semi-parametric method. Semi-parametric because parametric, because we assume a parametric distribution for the response variable. So we have the parameters. But it's semi-parametric because we use non-parametric approaches to model the effects of the covariates in a non-linear fashion using smoothers. So I think at this point you start to see the progress in flexibility from left to right, from the traditional linear model to this kind of modeling allowed by GAMS. Now let's look at an example of, for example, a distribution with 3 parameters, like the skew normal distribution. So we have location, scale, and shape. Okay, same principle. We can see whether there are effects of covariates on each of the parameters. And I want to show you here what this distribution looks like. So for example, this one, the one with the solid black line, is a skew normal distribution with location 0, which is here, standard deviation of 1, and skewness of 0. That's why it's symmetric, which is a normal distribution. Now, skew normal with the same, all of them have the same location, same scale, but look at the skewness. So this grayish line represents this one. This one with negative skewness is represented by the red one, and this one with a high skew is the blue one. And I'd like to refer you to this paper from 2018 by one of my collaborators, David Trofimo, and 2 statisticians he's working with. They produced this paper in 2018, which I highly recommend because it gives you, even though it refers to psychological data, I believe it applies to data from any field. And it's basically make you think about moving away from means and standard deviations and start thinking about locations and scales. This paper doesn't mention anything about GAMS, but in theory and conceptually is very close to what GAMS is arguing for. Another distribution, this one has 3 parameters. It's called a Gaussian distribution, and I give you 3 shapes that you can adopt with this distribution. So again, this one is the location, scale, and the shape. Okay, it has 3 parameters. The location is about 300 in all of them. They have the same spread, but the skewness is being controlled by this parameter here. The reason I mentioned this distribution is because it is being used to model what is called reaction time data, which is a kind of data that is very common in the field of cognitive neuroscience, and is simply a type of data that has a positive skew. As we can see here, the point is that reaction times are not normally distributed. So parameters like the mean and standard deviation are not good descriptors. You need something extra, something that can better fit the data. So we should speak about three parameters, which is the location, mu, sigma, and the shape, nu. Okay. Now we have here another example just to show you the benefits of GAMS in relation to traditional linear model. So this one is correlation data between age and average cortical thickness. Okay, we're speaking about micrometers. I think it's called micromillimeters. So it's very tiny slices, cortical thickness. So we can see, for example, that the young people, like babies, basically have certain amount of cortical thickness, and over time, the cortical thickness declines. Okay, the older you get, the less the cortical thickness. But then we can see the association is clearly non-linear. So if we do a linear fitting here, that's what we get. So these lines represent different quantiles in the dependent distribution according to the independent variable. So this one here represents the median. I think this one is 0.25. I think this one is 0.5, 0.75, and 0.95 quantiles. So that will be a result of a linear model. Then again, look at the formula. Basically, it's like checking the linear effects of the covariates on the mean response. As you can see from this graph, it's very obvious that the prediction is going to be very erroneous. So for example, you are saying that a person who is 50 years old might have a cortical thickness close to or just below 40. You see, according to the linear model, in reality, it's closer to something like 50 actually. So you can now start seeing how bad fit a linear model is. So what can we do to get a better fitting? Well, we can use a generalized additive model. As we know, these models now have the advantage that you can use nonlinear fitting on the response variable. So as you can see, the fit is much better than the linear model because we have smoothers here. So allows these smooth lines that fit the data better. It's not perfect. Let's look, for example, then again at the age of 50, you are predicting the average is fine, the median could be fine, but the quantiles, these upper quantiles, are not giving a good fit. It's way above what is expected. So what can we do better? Well, you can do heteroscedastic, which is now allowing, as you can see in the formula here, allowing for nonlinear fits on both the location and the scale. And you can see the lines do a much better job, you see? So you see a progression in fitness. This one totally unfit, better fit, way better fit. And now let's see what happens when we use GAMS. Look at the fits. It's nice. It's a nice fit. Okay. It's a nice fit to the data because we are now using a distribution with four parameters and we are using non-linear effects on each of the parameters according to our independent variable, which is age. So you see the fitness is way, way much better. And actually, at this stage, I should mention that the WHO, the World Health Organization, uses GAMS to model their data, especially on BMI. Mm, I don't have the paper here, but I can find it for you. That actually gives you the evidence that what I'm saying is true. The WHO is using GAMS for modeling their data and making predictions. Now, let's have an example with data. So we're going to show you a couple of data sets. So data set one is a simple data set. This is not psychometric data, properly speaking, but I want to show you this so you see how GAMs work. So we have a simple linear model where we have a model that goes like this. AI, which is arousal index, affected by age, gender, and BMI, which is body mass index. And we're assuming an additive effect, no interactions, just simple additive effects. We have a data frame with 106 observations and 9 variables, but we stick with these few variables here, just for the sake of the example. So we fit 3 different modes. This one, let's call it NO, is a GAMS mode using the normal family for this dataset, for our mode. So this one is a typical linear mode. That would be the LM function in R. Second, we are using a gamma modeling. This one will be a generalized linear mode, okay? And this one is a proper GAMS mode where we are using a different distribution. It's called flexible waveable extended distribution on this dataset, okay? So we are comparing 3 different modes. Now, using a technique that is called bucket plots, and there's a paper for this too. This is a marginal fitting, okay? What we are showing here is the residuals. And what the important thing here to be mindful of, I mean, there is some statistics behind the computation of this graph. I think it's based on the Jarke beta test, normality test. What you expect to see is that the residuals are well fitted, and the fitness is given to you by all these dots that are constructed using bootstrapping. All these dots fall within this gray area. So the first thing that we see here is that the normal distribution is not a good fit. This is telling you that your usual linear model is not a good option. Doesn't give you a good fit. It will give you biased estimates for the parameters. But we also can see that the gamma and the FWE distributions do a better job. Indeed, we can say that the FWE, which is the blue dots, actually do the best job compared between the two, between the gamma and the distribution. So like I said before, this is conditional fit. This is a marginal fitting. So we're looking at the dependent variable by itself. But then if we look at conditional fitting, for example, just let's focus on gender in relation to a dependent variable. Again, we can see that it's interesting. In the case of male participants, the normal is not a good fit. In the case of females, seems like all of them seem to give a very good fit because they fall within the ellipses here. But it's not an ellipsis, but within this area here. Be mindful of something here. This number here, 51 and 55, is showing you the actual data points that you have in the case of dependent variables for females and for males. Okay, so something to be mindful of when it comes to working with GAMS is that GAMS is very good, very powerful whenever you have fairly large amount of data. That's why I said the WHO is using GAMS for their modeling because they're using huge amounts of data. Okay, so be careful with that thing. This is just for the sake of exemplifying how GAMS works, but with this small data set, I'll be very careful using GAMS. I'll use maybe another technique, but no GAMS. But if you have large numbers, yes, I would say use GAMS. And here I'm using double condition. I'm conditioning by gender and by age groups, okay? Then again, the idea is to show the fitness of these 3 models. So we can see here that seems like, again, be mindful of the number of observations that we have in each subgroup, okay? But basically, you can see the normal is not good here. Even here, you start to see seeing that the N letter, which represents the normal distribution, starts kind of going a little bit out. Here is fine. Here you see the points going this way, and so on and so on. But then again, the FWE and the gamma distribution do a good fit. Okay, so this is like a visual assessment of your fitness of your models. There's another technique. I don't show it here called worm plots, like the animal worm plots. And it's also very good to see the fitness of a model, GAMS model. Now, I wanted to try something a bit more fanciful here. I was trying the same model that we saw before, but adding nonlinear fits for these two numeric continuous independent variables for age and BMI. Okay, so these are the new models now that I'm comparing. Again, normal, gamma, and weighable. Now what happens is this. These are the results of the fitness. Look at the AICs of these models compared to what we had before, which is given here, this one here. So look at the FWE was 761.61, and after using this non-linear fitting, we got 265.22. So it went up, which means the previous model was better than this one. So it's better to stay within a linear model. And it kind of makes sense because look at the association between BMI and arousal index or age and arousal index. This is a smoother line, smoother line here. As you can see, there are some curviness, but straight line would do a fairly good job here. So that's why the fitness of the model is telling you just stay within a linear fitting. You don't need to use non-linear fitting in this particular case. Okay, that's why you lose points in the AIC. Actually, you gain points, which means the model is getting worse and worse and worse because we know that the higher the AIC, the worse the model is. Now, this one is a proper psychometric dataset. It's taken from the book that I showed early on. It's an example of two participants observations. So they have the person, the psychometric item, which is 10 items, the response, which is binary response, 0 or 1, the gender of the participant, and the type of item that each represents. So we can see that items 1, 2, 5 represent what they call non-visual items, and items 6 to 10, what is called visual items, okay? So just emphasizing the two participants in this example dataset. This is just two participants, but we have more participants, obviously. There are, I think, I don't remember how many, but we have more than those, than two. So we do a typical rush model, which is one of the approaches in psychometrics, just to model the effects, just to investigate how good the items are. Okay, so that's the rush model, and this would be a GAMS version of that same model. So you see, we are using the binomial distribution as is being used here too. And then we can see the outputs from both. And look at the values here. So for example, look at the item 1 is 1.72 in the traditional model, and this is the result of GAMS 1.64, which is not much difference, and it's simply because GAMS uses in the background different algorithms. But the message here is to say, just to show the similarity in modeling techniques between classic approach and GAMS approach using a bimodal distribution, okay? Now we see the results of the random effects. Then again, we see similar values here, 0.78, here 0.77, okay? Then again, confirming that these two approaches give you similar or fairly similar results, okay? So what I'm showing here is how to use GAMS for the same purpose that you would use a GLMER approach using the binomial distribution. Obviously, psychometric data can have a dependent variable that is not only binomial, 1 or 0. Can be, for example, a rating scale that goes from 1 to 10, for example, and has discrete values. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In that case, you could use a distribution that is not the normal distribution, but something more suitable. For example, maybe even a Poisson distribution, for example, could be the case. And then we have the visual results of the quality of the item. So what is to remember here is that the higher the value, the easier the item is. So for example, it's showing that items, basically from items 1 to 10, it becomes more and more difficult to process for the participant. And you can see that these values actually are similar to what you found in the classic method. So you have item 1 here has a value of 1 point, kind of close 1 to point 0.5. You can see here. Item 2 is under, close to 1, which is very similar to this one here. Items 3, 4, 5 have similar values. You can see them here too. They are aligned here. Item 6 lower, you can see it here, and so on and so on. Okay. Now, if I compare the fitted values of these two models, I get this, which is then showing that the GAMS approach and the classic approach give you fairly similar results. Okay. But remember, you might say, oh, but I can keep using the classic approach. That's right. In this case, we're using a binomial distribution. That's fine. But like I said before, if you're using a dependent variable that has rating values, which is very common in psychometrics, when people are asked from 1 to 10, how happy are you today? 1 being not very happy at all, 10 being super happy. And you just put a number, you click on a number. Well, those numbers now become numbers between 1 and 10, and then they seem to be, if you use this approach, you'll be using a typical normal distribution. I'm not sure you can use a Poisson distribution, but with this one, you can surely use a Poisson distribution or any other distribution suitable for discrete data. Okay. So now some final thoughts. I want I want to show you now the big picture of where GAN stands in relation to what we know. So let's start from the very beginning. We know the linear model. We know that the linear model allows you to look at the effects of the covariates in a linear fashion in the average response, in the mean response of the response variable. The linear models are fairly highly interpretable. That's this one here. This is high, medium, low. F stands for flexibility, interpretability, and accuracy. So it's fairly interpretable, but has low flexibility and low accuracy, as we saw in examples before. Then we can do something better by using generalized linear models, because now we keep using linear fitting of the covariates, but we can now use distributions from the exponential family. Okay, and so now we go beyond the normal distribution to other distributions, a handful of distributions called exponential distributions. This method is again interpretable and allows you to improve your flexibility and accuracy. Then we have generalized additive models. In this one, we still model distributions of the exponential family, but now we can use linear fitting or non-linear fitting. So it's an improvement. The interpretability, when you start playing with smoothers, goes a little bit lower, but the accuracy stays high. It actually increases. And then the final level will be GAMS. So again, the interpretability can be sometimes challenging because we now use non-linear and linear fitting, but we can use any distribution, any probability distribution that we want for the dependent variable. That's why it's so flexible and allows you to have a higher level of accuracy. So that's the big picture of where GAMS stand in relation to other methods. Now, where GAMS stands in relation to other techniques. So I'm using two different graphs that focus on different things. So this one, for example, focus on model flexibility and model interpretability. And this one is on model interpretability and model accuracy. And there are different methods here. What I want to show you is this. GAMS is not being shown in these papers. This is a book chapter, this is a paper. But we can see the closest method is GAM, Generalized Additive Models. And the nice thing about this is that in both books, both text sources, they indicate that this method seems to be a very good compromise between interpretability and accuracy and flexibility and interpretability. So if I were to create now a graph with three sources of information, which is interpretability, flexibility, and accuracy, I could do something like this. So the x-axis is flexibility, the y-axis is interpretability, and the size of the circle or the intensity of the color is the accuracy. I think it would be better the size actually of the circle. So this is where GAM stands according to the previous sources. So it's halfway flexibility, halfway interpretability, and also, let's say, halfway accuracy. I believe, and this is the linear model, this is the GLM. So what I'm saying here is that a linear model has low flexibility, high interpretability, and very low accuracy. This one has better flexibility, uh, also good interpretability, but higher accuracy, and this one is there too. I believe that GAMS should stand somewhere here. That's what I believe. So that means fairly flexible or highly flexible, highly interpretable, but very, very accurate. That's my prediction. There is no data for this, what I'm claiming here, but I'm running a survey among statisticians around the world who have been using these techniques to provide simple ratings on what they believe should be the rating for each of these techniques in relation to their interpretability, flexibility, and accuracy. um, at this point, don't have anything else to add, so I'll leave it here and yeah, leave it here so we can then move on to questions because I'd like to hear what you think, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, from Gatu, let me
Hmm.
just post the
Hmm.
question
I can see the
here.
question. Yeah, is
Yeah,
interpretability such a trade-off? Why don't you always use the deep learning always? It's a good question. Look, as you know, there is a field of explainable AI. Okay, so in that field, people are actually trying to produce techniques that allow the user or any person to interpret the output of a model. The reason is, in my view, is a, yes, a trade-off. It's like, okay, what do you want? High accuracy, low interpretability, or the other way around? But remember that we're talking about flexibility as well. So, in my opinion, it's good to have a good trade-off between both. Okay, so it's like halfway. So I prefer, if I have to choose between a method that is more interpretable or highly interpretable, but perhaps a little bit less accurate, I'll go for that method. I hopefully managed to answer the question from Gatu. Gatu can tell me in the chat if I answered the question. Abednego is saying the importance of this session. Any other questions that you have? And please feel free to ask me any question that you need. Mm, okay, I need to ask here. How do you understand over dispersion for the person who is asking the question? How do you understand over dispersion, in your opinion? So look, going back to, I mean, I haven't received any answer yet about my question that how you understand over dispersion. But if you are thinking about heterogeneity in data as a index of over dispersion, that's when I use a GAMS model that allows me to model the effects of the covariates on the location, but also on the scale. So I can model out a little bit of the over dispersion in the data. So I don't know if that answers your question. Hmm. Mm. Ombati is asking, is there a standard R package that has GAMS model? Yes. Package like this, GAMS, GAMS dist, there is GAMS for mixed distributions, um, there is GAMS for inflated distributions. There are different packages. There are many. And that's why I said at the beginning, I'm very happy to share the textbooks because I have all the textbooks in GAMS as PDFs and also articles. I have a few articles that I recommend. Yes, you can use a custom distribution. That's another field. Yeah, I got to. That's another field of research I'm working on. For example, the FWE. F is a custom distribution. The one I showed in the example in the presentation that actually gave the best fit, the FWE, that's a custom distribution. So basically, you can think about this. If you manage to implement a distribution in a GAMS setting, like a GAMS, there's a code for that, like a GAMS framework, you can use it. And that's exactly what a colleague of mine and I are doing at the moment. We are working on implementing distributions that exist in R, for example, but are not usable within a GAMS framework. We are trying to translate them using our code so they become usable within GAMS. And the latest that we did was the FWE. That paper is going to come out very soon in the journal. It's called Australian and New Zealand Journal of Statistics. It's going to be published very soon, where we show this particular distribution. And my colleague Freddie, the one of the co-authors of the presentation, he has implemented several distributions already. In he has them in a repository, in a GitHub repository. So that's what I say. That's what I said. Basically, you can use any statistical distribution in GAMS, so long well, which is not really that difficult. You need to do some tests, of course, on calibration, but once it is done, it can be used. Any other questions? And I'm gonna type my email here in case you have uh, extra questions and you don't maybe don't want to ask them through. Feel free to send me an email. If you want access to some of the textbooks, papers, just let me know and I'll happily share them with you. I understand there will be a recording of this meeting. I think it's being recorded. Yeah. So yeah, I got to. There'll be a recording. Thank you. So look, like I said, thank you very much for your attention. And there is my email. Feel free to email me. As you can see, maybe from this presentation, I'm pretty relaxed, easygoing. So feel free to send me any question that you want. And look, one of the things I'm really interested is if any of you felt compelled to pursue investigation in GAMS, please get in touch with me because I'm very keen on making collaborators in different places, statisticians or people who have good skills in R, interested in data modeling, and want to get into this field of GAMS. Please let me know and get in touch with me. Also, there is a new book that came out a couple of months ago in GAMS on GAMS. Has new techniques in it. I also can share that book, but please send me an email with a reminder, and I'll send you the book as a PDF. Hmm. So, Keith, what do you think? Should we then leave it here if there is no more
Yeah.
questions?
Yes. I was just giving my closing remarks and
Hmm.
thanking you for the talk.
Yeah, no worries.
And I'll engage you more on maybe another session also
Hmm.
related to GAMS, and we'll try it out on our side and also give feedback
Hmm.
and also teach others on how to leverage GAMS in their statistical modeling.
Mm-hmm. And no, like I said, if maybe I don't know, I like to actually like to hear if someone can put it in the chat right now,
Yeah.
if any of you, any of the attendees knew this method before. Did any of you knew GAMS before? Because I'll be very interested in that. If you have been exposed to yes, good, good. That's very good. That's very good. So yeah, all of you who are interested in this technique, please get in touch with me because I have a lot of projects going on in relation to this. Like what we are doing with my colleagues, and my colleagues are actually Fernanda Bastiani, who is
Yeah,
one of the creators of GAMS. She's one of my colleagues. There's another guy called in Germany called Thomas Nieb, like
yeah,
this. Thomas Nieb. He's also one of my co-authors in a couple of papers. He's
yeah,
also one of the authors of the new book in GAMS. We have different things going on. So, for example, one of my collaborators in Colombia, we are implementing distributions. That's what we are doing. So um, let's suppose the Kuwaraswamy distribution is there. Okay, it's implemented in
mm,
R, but you cannot use it as is. You cannot use it directly for GAMS modeling. You need to do some extra coding to get it ready
yeah,
for GAMS modeling. You have to run some simulations to see how effective the parameterization is, and so on and so on.
yeah,
Once you have it ready, which is not really, it's not really a pain, it's not really painful, but it requires some work.
yeah,
Once you have it ready, you can implement it in
yeah,
GAMS, and that's what we are doing. So, for example, the FWE distribution, which is accepted
yeah,
in the Journal of Statistics in Australia and New Zealand, is
yeah,
basically that. It's like saying, hey, there is this distribution which has never been used in GAMS. We now show how to use it in GAMS. It's ready to use. That's it. So if any of you is interested in this kind of work, please let me know and we can start collaborating because we also want to, especially show. I mean, my area of research is psychology,
yes,
but I want to show to people in the fields of experimental psychology, cognitive neuroscience, these techniques, because in my field, at least, as far as I know, I'm
yeah,
perhaps the only person using this technique in psychological data. So yeah, I'd be very keen to collaborate, make new friends in different parts of the world.
yeah, yeah, and it would be awesome even seeing it being used maybe in a field like engineering or business.
Yes, yes, yes. There is one paper I've seen where they use GAMS for modeling military data. I think that's the only I've seen. Yeah. Mm.
Nice. Okay, we'll do that. I'll reach out to
Okay.
anyone who is interested and
Yeah.
send them
Yeah.
your email
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
collaborate more.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
So thank you for today and
Okay.
catch up
Hmm.
more
Okay.
in the session.
Okay. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you and welcome again.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. We stay in touch.
Okay, stay in touch. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
So thank you for attending our session. I'll share the recording via our YouTube channel, which I'll post a few minutes after this. And also share what you have learned today using the two hashtags which were running on the bottom part of your screen and tag at rdekut and at rconsortium. And have a good day. Bye and thank you.